Thank you everyone for joining. Welcome back. Please welcome Mark Herschberg. Mark is a hands-on CTO and VP of Engineering who's built and scaled B2B SaaS and marketplace companies, particularly in cybersecurity and AI. He taught at MIT, authored the Career Toolkit book, which you will see right back there, and holds more than 10 patents. And somehow he finds time to sit on the board of a coral reef restoration project, which should be a talk at some point here. Helping Rico part of the ocean is a pretty impressive side gig, by the way. And with that, sir, the mic is all yours, and looking forward to this one.
All right, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today and everyone who's watching the recording of this later. I'm going to jump in. I've got about 8 or 9 slides I'm going to quickly go through, and then we'll get into Q&A. So let me go with my presentation. You should all be seeing the PowerPoint, correct? All right. The project is called Throughstone. This is 100% open source BSD3, so you can take it, use it, enjoy, no cost to anyone. The challenge that I found when I started AI coding, of course, it would work kind of. This is going back about 2-ish years. It would mostly work sometimes. And we all probably heard the stories of people saying, oh, it's so great. I can build all these features. And then a few months in, they say, it collapsed. I've got a pile of spaghetti code. It's not working. I wasn't encountering that problem. And I started to talk to people who did. I started to ask why. And it comes down to discipline. I know most people live on this call are experienced CTOs, and we always teach our teams, let's plan, let's be disciplined, let's be focused. That's how we avoid a lot of tech debt and spaghetti code. So I created that in my personal processes, and having done this on a few projects, both the enterprise work I do and personal projects, said, let me really codify this, and that's what created Throughstone. The name, by the way, comes from an architectural principle. You can see when you have a wall, for example, the Throughstone is what's running all the way through it as an anchor point. So the way Throughstone works, you download the repo. It does a lot of upfront design. It actually happens pretty quickly, as we'll see, records all the decisions, and then executes in small steps. What AI is very good at are the things that engineers least like to do. AI is actually very good at writing documentation, which we know engineers often hate. And AI is very good at creating tests, which also a lot of engineers hate. So we can leverage that to help keep guide rails onto our project to keep it focused. And by doing this and running things in very small units, we can actually get very directed work. And I know today, of course, AIs, they can run much longer. We can have an AI run for 2 hours and create a bunch of code and we'll be back later. And it will get it 90% of the way right. But doing smaller steps helps keep it a lot more focused. But this can all be automated. So the general loop is that we do design, and I'm going to dive deep into each of these steps a little later. We're going to design the system up front. Then we do this step loop. And so these steps are basically functional tasks. And the way steps work, you can think of it probably larger than a small Jira ticket, might be the size of maybe not quite an epic. It really depends how you're sizing things. Maybe a medium to large if you're doing t-shirt sizes, and it breaks it down to small steps. And then it does a check-in process because we want to prevent tech debt from accumulating. We want to prevent doc drift, for example. I'll show how that works. Importantly, Throughstone is the full SDLC. I know there's a whole bunch of AI tools out there. Some are great for design. Some are great for here's how we execute certain features. This does everything from design to implementation, and it even thinks through how do we deploy, how do we observe. It includes things like runbooks for when you're operating the system because it's the entire life cycle. I'm sure some pieces are missing, and over time, I hope to add it. I hope you can give me suggestions on what new functionality is needed. Some of the documents that it creates, we talked about there's architecture documents, and that's not just, well, here's the classic architecture. What's the security threat model you're worried about? What's the scaling going to look like? Obviously, it's going to include things like your UI design docs. It's going to have coding standards. When you make decisions in your chats, it gets recorded into ADRs. because you don't want your project decisions to live in someone's chat history. They need to live in the repo where they're accessible. The prompts themselves, because all these steps you're creating, the functionality that you're building, it's done in prompts that this will create for you. So it's going to create the high level prompts and then the sub prompts. And it's going to do these check-ins and report on that. And of course, all the documents it creates aren't just things you blindly accept. A good engineer should be, let me double check, let me push back on this, let me have these conversations. So you obviously can change it whether you're in the prompt or you can do it by hand elsewhere. This, by the way, works with any AI system, Claude or ChatGPT. You can also run in Cursor or in anti-gravity or whatever tool you like. So let's talk about how this actually works. We're going to get a little more detailed. To set it up, you're just cloning the repo. You run a init script. It's going to ask you a couple questions. Is this a mono repo or multiple repos? What's the name of the project? Are you doing it yourself or are there going to be other people involved? Do you have a Git repo already set up for it? Just a few basic questions. You can also put them as command line flags. That takes all of 15 seconds to clone and then maybe another 30 seconds to run through the init script. And then you just tell it, read agents.md and follow it. That's all you drop into the chat, and it guides itself through the process. Some of you might remember the wizards of old, back when we would install software on our desktop machines and the wizard would walk you through what to do. That's how this works, but it's a much more sophisticated, dynamic wizard because it's backed by an LLM. And I think philosophically, we're going to see a lot more of these wizard approaches, not just for software, but for all sorts of business processes that can use the power of the LLM to create much more flexible wizards. So we talked about design, and the way it works, there are a number of different design documents that it's going to look to create. These are each going to be a conversation. So for example, scale and performance. In the conversation, it's going to ask, how many people, how many users are going to be on the system day one? When you eventually hit success, how many users then? How is that growth going to be? What are some of your milestones? I'm using users. Obviously, it will adjust if it's something else like transactions or some other number. It's an LLM. It's smart enough to ask about it. By the way, the first question it asks is, what's your level of experience? Now, I know most of the people I see live on this call, you're CTOs. You're going to say, I'm an experienced engineer or CTO. There's also, I'm a more junior mid-level engineer, or I'm a vibe coder, and it will actually adjust the questions it's asking to your level of experience. So for those of us who say I'm a CTO, it's going to put things in technical terms. For someone who's saying I'm coming at this as a vibe coder, it's going to put it more in plain English and not use a lot of jargon and technical terms that we know. For UI design and direction, that's one of my favorites. It will actually show you, here's some different color palettes. What do you like? Pick one or give me other feedback. Here are different button styles. Here are different fonts. It's going to go through step by step. What are each of the pieces? It's going to show them to you and get your feedback. Things like security risks. What are you worried about? Insider threats? Are you worried about ransomware? Are you worried about someone stealing your data? And it's going to build out that model for you. Now, if you have documents already, if you already have an architecture doc, UI docs that maybe you made in some other tool, you can just drop those in. It's not going to repeat the questions. It's going to say, great, thanks, you got me 80, 90, 100% of the way there. I know what to do. It might ask some clarifying questions. And you can see on the right, this is from, in the demo I built as a kind of proof of concept, a dating app. And during the conversation, we talked through security and said, well, here's what I think we need to protect. And I came back and said, yes, there's also the user email and PII, add that to the list. That's the type of conversation you're going to have. Again, either in the session or you'll look at the document it creates and then go back and say, adjust this, add this, remove that. There's a few you'll see down on the left, there's some conditional sessions. So you might not need privacy and compliance. I do a lot of cybersecurity work. We've got a lot of things we have to do. I work in healthcare as well. For a simple system, you might not need that. Building an app, if you don't have an app, it completely skips the app design session. And if later you say, you know what, now we're adding an app, it will actually catch that as you put that into your design guidance and say, hey, I noticed you're adding an app. we should really run through this interview session. When it comes down to the building, these are the steps. It's going to read all these documents. Now, it doesn't have to read every one in detail. It's going to go in and say, okay, you've asked me to add this type of feature. Now I'm going to read through the relevant documentation, and I'm going to create the little sub-steps within it. So for example, suppose you're building some SaaS software and you say, it's time to build some type of, I want to bill people, I want to create a monthly charge for them. That might be a step. It's going to break it down to sub-steps saying, first, you come up with a plan. Every step starts with a plan. And the plan is, let me go read, let's say you're using Stripe. Let me go read the Stripe documents, read the architecture documents of your own system, figure out what we need to do. And then it's going to break it down and say, first, we're going to build the framework, maybe a new microservice. Second sub-step, I'm going to do the connection to Stripe. Third sub-step, I'm going to create the monthly billing. Fourth is I'm going to handle all the possible return values for credit card expired or other edge cases. Maybe the fifth is I'm going to connect it to your notification system to send the email to the user. And then after that, it says next sub-step, I'm going to create all the tests for it and run it and make sure it works. So it does in these very small steps. Again, you're not just blindly saying, do this. It's going to show you the plan. You review it. It's going to show you for each step. It creates a prompt for each one of those sub-steps. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's how to do it. Again, you can edit it. And of course, you've got the interactive discussion as it does it. So you can answer questions or give it guidance as it goes. I mentioned as well, there's that check-in. Now, a check-in happens by default every 20 steps. You can adjust that. And it does a few things. It checks that, do all these documents we have, are they aligned to the code, or have we got an av alignment? So it looks from the docs, make sure they're representing the code correctly. It then looks the other way. Is the code correctly reflecting what's in the docs? And if it finds anything to reconcile, it will raise that to you. It will run all the tests. And of course, if you're doing a nightly or a weekly full test run, you might say, let's take this out of the check-in. I don't need it. But it will automatically just run all these and flag what might not be working. And then we'll also do a security check. Now, it does just a basic check here to look for things like have any CVEs come out against your libraries or other issues. And if it notices, hey, you've done something really interesting here, maybe you've all of a sudden just say you're now importing medical records, which you didn't before, I'm going to flag that maybe we need to do a deeper review and you can do a higher level security check. But by default, it does these basic checks to make sure you're staying on course. And if you're doing small things, so the step process obviously has some overhead. If you're doing something small like, oh, I just want to add a dark mode feature, we know that's not very complicated. You don't have to create a full step for that. You can, of course, just go into the chat and say, add this feature, add this button, do something small. You don't have to run through the whole step. Finally, the last question that I am often asked is, this is great for new projects. Can this work on my legacy systems? And for that, the answer is yes, it can, but it's going to get easier in the future. So right now, if you have a legacy system, you set this up, you're going to have to manually say, here's all my repos, for example. Oh, and here's some documents I have for it and put it in. And you're going to have to walk it through a bit manually, of course, manually with an LOM. Manually is look at this doc, look at that doc, look at this repo, and it's going to then orient that into this framework so you can use it going forward. I'm working on a new feature now that's going to be the 2.0 version of Throughstone, Throughstone Retcon. And Retcon, for retroactive continuity for you literature fans, is going to allow us to take an existing project and scan it much more automatically to figure out what it's doing and then get imported so you can move this going forward. But you can apply this to your legacy systems today, and it will then go forward following this framework. And of course, can be used for Greenfield. So that's the overview. There's a website, throughstone.org, that will show you some of what's in here, a little more detail. And there's a GitHub repo there. Again, it's BSD3, so completely free for you to use. That's the formal presentation. So let me see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. Just before we move on to questions, I will request you stop sharing screen and everyone else turn on their camera so that Aisha can take a quick picture. And right after that, I am happy to facilitate the questions.
Thank you.
And with that, we can use the hand raise tool here, or we can all just shout together too. Who wants to go first?
Manon had a question.
I did not. I'm very
Oh,
non-technical now. But since no one has a question, I'm curious, like this, given this is open source, are you the only one working on this, or shouldn't this be
uh,
open for
yeah,
people to
right now
observe
it's
it?
me. If you'd like to contribute, you certainly can, or you can just say, "Hey, Mark, this would be cool," or "I could use this feature," and I'm quite happy to take that into account and put on our roadmap.
Okay. Um,
I can't find the
so
hand tool. I
no
use
worries. Forget the hand control. Just give me a shout and I'll. So we've got two Corys today, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing. Oh, it's both Corys, right? So yes.
I think so. Yeah,
Oh,
my
okay.
question is, so I know you basically alluded to um, human gates at various intervals, but what's your philosophy and what's this philosophy about reading the code and reviewing it? If not every line, a skim through.
You're asking not just for this tool, but in general, my philosophy on that. Is that right?
In general, but also how does this tool allow you to review code? Uh, and because you also talked about specifying dev patterns, so like to me that speaks to things like how do I put forms together? How do I do input validation? How do I do database transactions? Um, what does that look like through this system to review those patterns at the small detail level or in larger changes?
Or first, philosophically, I think business needs to make a decision because they can either say, hey, AI is supposed to speed you up, so go fast, and we know it's not perfect, and that's okay. Or they can say, you're the developer, you're responsible for every line of code, at which point I say, that's fine, but now I need to read every line of code if you're holding me responsible. And that's the limiting factor, as we all know. And that's just something I think the world is just starting to wake up to. But of course, it's hard. I certainly know CEOs who say, I heard, 1,000% improvement from some podcast. Why isn't that happening here? And that's what they're missing. But I think this will start to be surfaced a little better. And it's really what your project is. When I'm doing cybersecurity and healthcare, yeah, we are reviewing every line of code because you kind of have to. If I'm doing, especially for some of my toy projects, I built an app the other week I haven't released yet. And you know what? If there's a bug in there, great, I'll just release an updated version. And I did not do a detailed review of the code. It's a very simple app. So it's really what works for you. Now, as it generates the code, what I will typically do when it's not something super critical, but it is important, I'll certainly skim through the code. I'll look at the key paths and I'll also double check the key test paths to make sure it's testing correctly. And then look at, because this does, when I say it does testing, it's not just unit tests. And by default, I think it aims for about 80 to 90% unit test coverage. But we'll also do API tests and end-to-end tests. Again, you can override that in any way you want. So I'm testing not just, well, the unit tests work, but I'm looking at what are the particular end-to-end tests, and does this make logical sense? Does this feel like it's working? And if folks have ideas for here's a tool or an approach for after writes to do some type of review that's not just, well, look over the same code you wrote and make sure it works, but some way to do it a little more independently, I'm very happy to incorporate those ideas to strengthen the tool.
Marcus?
Hi, Mark. I think this is very cool, and thanks for sharing. Um, I've built a number of agents now that typically work with the Cloud API. They do something like intake screening, for example, or eligibility assessments and so on. So they also have a catalog or a database access, right, for what an organization is offering. And there's a common architecture that's been emerging out of those that I reuse. And then there's MCP and other things. Do you have a particular architecture sort of view built in, a bias in there, or do you have different architectures that this chooses from based on the early interview, or is there no architecture whatsoever? Is there room for something? That kind of question.
Yeah, really good question. There's no default architecture, not even, hey, assume MVP. It's whatever comes out of your design conversations, your input, and the LLM itself. I've debated, should there be some template? So, for example, this ships with coding standards, all the standard ones, and you can override any of those or drop in your own. Should there be architectural standards? Here's a standard interface for an MCP server. Here's just a MVC kind of architecture or classic three-tier architecture type thing. I'm open to those ideas, what some of those more common parents might be and how to drop them in. And the system, what it does with the coding standards, it ships with, I think, about 8 of them. And then once you pick your language, it's going to delete the ones you don't use just to clean it up. It deletes other things that come in from the installation. So we could ship with a whole bunch of architecture frameworks, which you would then be able to override and would just delete what you don't use. So yeah, I'd love to hear ideas of what architectures and how you think that should be expressed.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Nathan, all yours.
To follow up with that question, Mark, would it be possible to pre-supply some ADRs in the case one has some predisposition on architectures that need to be applied to a given project? In other words, treat a couple of ADRs, maybe a handful of ADRs, as my requirements that are in addition to the general business requirements of a specific project?
100%. During the first interview, it's first going to ask you what's your experience level, and then give me a high level. What are we trying to do? What are the goals of this project? It also asks for non-goals, right? What's explicitly not in scope, and it starts to just go at a high level. And you can, in this very first chat, within seconds of starting it up, or at any point during any of the conversations, drop in a document and say, hey, by the way, here's the design docs I created. Here's the architecture I want you to follow. And it's going to take that into account. Now, there is in session, I think it's either 2 or 3, it asks for what are the main components of the system. Most of what I create is, of course, some multi-server, multi-repo system, right, for all my different microservices. And so I want to enumerate, here's the billing service, here's a communication service, here's a user management service, and this is what each one does. So I'm giving it hints through prose in that. But again, you can just drop in design docs you have, whether it's just a Word doc or PDFs, or it could be formal architecture docs, and it will take all that into account. One thing to add, the ADRs are separate from the architectural documents. So it will have that list of all those different facets it looks at. It typically creates one for each, unless you're telling it to skip one or to do something different. One for each, and then the ADRs as you go, when you say, hey, we are explicitly not going to validate our users for some reason. It's going to make a note saying, you made this decision, and it just creates the architectural decision record separate from the architecture documents. If you import a legacy system, it doesn't guess what ADRs. It just says, okay, I see this existing code and here's the architecture, but I'm not going to try to guess why it's designed this way versus that. You can tell it and say, I just want to let you know we made this decision and here's why, and it'll create the record for you, but it's not going to retroactively take a guess. You're opening up too many risks when you do that.
Okay, we have time for one last question, or or we don't. So Mark, thank you very much.
If I may, my request to the group, please try this out yourself, someone on your team. Try it certainly for new projects if you want to try it on a legacy project, and please let me know how it's working. You can start a discussion on the GitHub project. You can email me directly and just let me know, hey, this is working, this isn't, I like this, I don't like this. Your feedback helps me make this better.
Thank you. We'll be sharing it with our team too. I already requested Aisha to do that. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and Mark for today's talk. And looking forward to seeing this tool grow and get better and help everyone. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.